He was just 8 years old, a little boy with soft brown eyes, a crooked smile, and a backpack full of hope. His name was Robert Manwill, and in the summer of 2009, he vanished. The nation searched, his family pleaded, and behind it all was a truth so dark, most couldn't imagine it. A truth buried beneath layers of missed warnings, systemic failure, and a child's final cries. Robert was a beautiful, innocent 8-year-old boy who suffered in silence. This is his story, not the version buried in court transcripts or stitched together by sound bites, but the one that demands we feel it, because we owe him that. This isn't just a case, it's not just another headline, and we are not just another true crime channel. Every story we tell is a call to action, a reminder that change is not optional, it's overdue. Each child victim deserves more than a headline. They deserve a voice, a legacy, and a world that refuses to look away. We share their stories to spark a movement, to build a community strong enough to stand up to the evil that targets our children. Because let's be honest, our children aren't safe. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? Join us. Be part of the fight. Go to inspectorgenxr.com for petitions, updates, and ways to get involved. Together we can build an army for our children, a force that won't back down. There is strength in numbers. Let's grow this movement. Let's be the difference. July 24th, 2009, Boise, Idaho. It was a warm Friday evening, the kind that lingers with the scent of barbecues and the sound of children's laughter echoing between apartment buildings. At the Oak Park Village Apartments, 8-year-old Robert Manwill was outside, playing near the courtyard with a few neighborhood kids. He wasn't far, he wasn't alone. He was doing what any child does on a summer evening, making memories and chasing adventure between the street lamps. But then, just like that, he was gone. One moment he was there, the next he had vanished into the twilight. No screams, no sound, just silence, and the sickening sense that something had shifted. Robert wasn't supposed to be in Boise for long. He lived with his father, Charles Manwill, in New Plymouth, about an hour away. It was a safer, more stable life, one earned after his mother, Melissa Jenkins, had lost custody due to a violent injury she inflicted on Robert's infant brother. But like so many custody arrangements, visitation was still allowed. And this summer, obedient, trusting, kind-hearted Robert was sent to spend time with his mother, Melissa, and her boyfriend, Daniel Ehrlich, the very people he should have been protected from. One of the girls Robert was playing with would tell her family she left for a moment to talk to another child. When she returned, Robert was gone. That window, just minutes, was all it took. While the neighborhood still buzzed with summer energy, Robert had slipped into darkness, and no one realized it until it was far too late. Melissa and Daniel didn't panic. They didn't scream his name into the night. They waited, then made a call. They told police he must have wandered off, that maybe he got lost, but their eyes didn't match their words, and beneath their shaky story was a silence that said more than anything else. The morning after Robert vanished, Boise woke up to a nightmare. A child was missing, last seen playing outside his mother's apartment complex. The community mobilized fast. Flyers were printed, volunteers poured in, police set up a command post, and for 9 agonizing days, the city searched. Thousands joined the effort. Neighbors, strangers, classmates, even people who had never met Robert combed through the parks, alleyways, and canal banks. They checked dumpsters, they knocked on doors, they left no stone unturned. The The search became one of the largest in Boise's history. In the early days of the investigation, Melissa and Daniel stood before cameras, their faces tight with concern, their voices trembling with practiced grief. They thanked the public, they joined search parties, they cried on cue. But behind the scenes, detectives were watching, and they weren't buying it. From the very beginning, their stories didn't line up. Timelines shifted, details changed, and when pressed, both Melissa and Daniel seemed more focused on controlling the narrative than finding Robert. Detectives noticed it first in the small things. Melissa claimed Robert had been playing outside all evening, but no one could confirm seeing him after a certain time. Daniel said Robert had asked to go to a birthday party, but no such party ever existed. They began referring to Robert in the past tense. Melissa saying, quote, "I remember when Robert would just sit and watch cartoons all day." Daniel adding, quote, "Yeah, I remember when he'd just lay on the couch." Those words sent chills down investigators' spines because Robert had only been missing for hours, and already they were speaking of him as if he were gone. And then there was the strange discovery. A package of Jimmy Dean sausage biscuits, just like the ones from their freezer, found in the bushes outside their apartment. Daniel insisted it was a sign Robert had run away. Investigators saw it for what it was, a staged clue. By July 30th, police had obtained a warrant and began searching the apartment. What they found was chilling. A hole in the drywall, hidden behind a taped-up piece of paper. The hole looked to be the size of a child's head, so they cut out the section to send off for forensic testing. Meanwhile, Daniel's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He faked an overdose to avoid questioning. He lashed out during interviews. Investigators suspected foul play. They suspected Melissa and Daniel, and deep down they feared Robert was gone forever. But without a body, they were stuck. There was no physical evidence, no confession, no eyewitness, just a growing sense of dread and a community clinging to hope. So they waited, they watched, and they searched. 9 days after Robert vanished, hope was hanging by a thread. But on August 3rd, 2009, came the call everyone feared. A traffic flagger working near the New York Canal spotted something in the water. At first, she thought it was a doll, but she looked closer. Her heart sank. It was a child, a little boy, fully clothed, shoes still on, his small frame weighed down with rocks, stuffed into his pockets in an attempt to keep him hidden forever. The canal's current was strong, the water murky, but there, tangled in the reeds and debris, was the small, lifeless body of an 8-year-old boy. It was Robert. The retrieval was delicate. Officers and divers worked with care, not just as professionals, but as parents, siblings, and human beings. Some had spent days searching for Robert. Others had seen his face on every flyer, every news broadcast. Now they were the ones bringing him home. The grief was palpable. The silence at the scene said everything. This wasn't just the end of a search. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And for those who pulled Robert from the canal, it was a moment that would never leave them, because they hadn't just found a body. They had found a child who had been failed by people, by the system, by silence. Until that moment, detectives had been working with suspicion. They couldn't prove a crime had occurred. They couldn't make arrests. They could only watch, wait, and hope that the truth would surface. But now they had it. Robert's body told a story monsters tried to bury. His pockets were filled with rocks, an attempt to weigh him down, to erase him. But the canal's current had other plans, and when he was found, the investigation exploded into overdrive. Detectives immediately began re-examining every detail. They secured search warrants and returned to the apartment Melissa and Daniel had shared. Cabinets, computers, and other materials were seized from the home. A vehicle was towed from the complex for forensic analysis. The pressure on Melissa and Daniel intensified. Detectives had already been circling, but now, with Robert's body recovered and the evidence mounting, there was nowhere left to hide. Melissa was brought before a grand jury in mid-August of 2009, and it was there, under oath, that she finally began to unravel. She admitted that on the morning of July 24th, the day Robert was reported missing, he had woken up in visible distress. He was stumbling, disoriented, and in pain. He told her his head hurt, his stomach hurt, his back hurt. He could barely walk. Melissa knew something was wrong. She knew he needed medical attention, but she did nothing. She also confessed to hiding Robert from social workers during their visits, keeping him out of sight so they wouldn't see his injuries. She admitted to watching Daniel harm him, witnessing the fear in her son's eyes, and still, she stayed silent. In her own words, she told the grand jury, quote, "It's my fault Robert's not with us anymore." That statement, simple and devastating, was the moment she crumbled. It wasn't just a confession, it was an acknowledgement of complicity, of cowardice, of a mother who chose evil over her child. Her testimony helped prosecutors secure an indictment for first-degree murder, and while she would later plead guilty to aiding and abetting second-degree murder, that moment before the grand jury was the first time she stopped pretending, the first time she let the truth breathe. On August 18, 2009, a grand jury indicted both Melissa Jenkins and Daniel Ehrlich for first-degree murder. That same day, they were arrested and booked into the Ada County Jail. Daniel was held without bond. Melissa's bond was set at $2 million. The community's reaction was swift and visceral. People who had searched for Robert, who had lit candles and posted flyers, now felt betrayed. They had stood beside Melissa and Daniel, believing their tears. Now they realized those tears were lies. Deputy Chief Jim Kearns of the Boise Police Department said it best. Probably no other case in Boise history has touched so many people. The arrests didn't bring Robert back, but they marked the beginning of justice, and they sent a message. This child mattered. His story would not be buried. It was becoming clear that Melissa and Daniel were responsible for Robert's tragic death. But who were they? How could this have happened? Were there signs that were missed? Let's take a deeper dive into Melissa and Daniel and reveal the monsters behind the mask. Melissa Jenkins had a history of instability, poor judgment, and violence long before Robert's final summer. She was the biological mother of multiple children, including Robert and an infant son named Aiden. In 2008, Melissa was convicted of injury to a child after Aiden suffered a severe head injury. The baby was removed from her care and she was placed on probation. Despite this, she was later allowed visitation of Aiden and with Robert, visits that would ultimately prove fatal for Robert. Daniel Ehrlich was not Robert's father. He was Melissa's boyfriend, and the man social workers shockingly approved to supervise Robert's visits. On paper, Daniel had completed parenting classes, but behind closed doors, he was a volatile, controlling presence with a disturbing history of violence. He had a violent criminal history, including convictions for burglary, grand theft, battery, and substance-related offenses. Yet he was allowed to live in the home where Robert visited. Multiple ex-girlfriends later testified that Daniel had nearly killed them. One described him as intimidating and vulgar. A male witness said Daniel tried to fight him and made him fear for his life. Even a counselor who had worked with Daniel expressed concern about his impulse control. Daniel was over 6 feet tall and weighed nearly 280 pounds. Robert was only 50 pounds, yet Daniel saw him not as a child, but as a threat. And here's the most infuriating part. Social workers were visiting the home up to 3 times a week to check on baby Aiden. During those visits, Robert was hidden in closets so no one would see the horrific injuries Daniel had inflicted on him. Daniel admitted in interviews that he concealed Robert during these visits. Melissa helped cover it up. They dressed Robert in long sleeves to hide the injuries. They kept him out of sight. Robert, who was only visiting for the summer, wasn't officially listed as living in the home, and that would technically become a loophole that cost him his life. So the system that could have protected Robert was in the home 3 times a week, but never saw the child who needed it most, not because he wasn't there, but because no one looked for him. Ada County Deputy Prosecutor Jill Longhurst said it plainly. Part of the tragedy is 3 times a week, social workers were coming into the home to teach Danny Ehrlich how to be a better parent, and Robert was hidden in the closet. That wasn't just a failure, it was a collapse that led to the death of an innocent 8-year-old boy. But Robert was more than a victim. He was a little boy with a big heart and even bigger dreams. He loved Harry Potter, drawn to the magic, the bravery, the idea that even the smallest among us could fight back against darkness. He was saving his money for violin lessons, eager to create something beautiful. He wanted to be a soldier like his dad, proud, strong, and full of purpose. He was smart, curious, outgoing, the kind of kid who made friends with everyone he met. His stepmom once said, "Everybody was his new friend. He just hadn't met you yet." He was the kind of child who left a mark, and that's exactly what Melissa and Daniel tried to erase. But they failed because Robert's story didn't end in that canal. It carried into the courtroom, where prosecutors, detectives, and a grieving family fought to make sure his voice was finally heard. By the time Melissa Jenkins and Daniel Ehrlich were to stand trial, the community was raw with grief and ready for answers. The courtroom would become the place where Robert's voice, silenced in life, would finally be heard. The case against Melissa and Daniel was built on a chilling mosaic of physical evidence, behavioral red flags, and damning testimony. Melissa's trial never happened. She pled guilty to aiding and abetting second-degree murder, accepting a 25-year sentence. At first, Melissa's mother stood by her. She believed her daughter's version of events, believed that maybe Melissa hadn't known, hadn't seen. But when the full details emerged, when she heard how Robert was hidden in closets, how horribly injured he was, and begging for help, even Melissa's mother couldn't defend her anymore. She withdrew her support, devastated by the truth. It was a moment that underscored just how deep the betrayal ran, not just of Robert, but of everyone who loved him. Melissa has shown some outward signs of remorse, but they've been met with deep skepticism by the court, by the public, and even by her own family.
Hello, this is a collect call from
Melissa Jenkins,
an inmate at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center.
Mom's not answering the phone, even though you get first minute and a half free or something like that here, and so she's not answering my calls at all.
Melissa, I'm going to tell you something. Your mom and your dad need a little bit of time.
Okay, I'll leave them alone then.
You need to leave them alone for a while.
Okay.
Melissa, I think the problem is this. They have been your closest allies, and no one has believed in you more than your mother. Your mother fought tooth and nail more than you will ever know to tell people how innocent you were. And then when she heard, during the sentencing, everything that she heard, it was just very difficult for her.
A lot of people are like, how could you not be upset about your sentence? It's not the sentence that bothers me, it's the people. But I had to do something right for Robert.
Did it ever occur to you that bad things were happening to Robert?
Honestly, in the beginning, no. Just I didn't live there. I wasn't allowed. I was there for 2 hours a day. That was it.
Because the neighbors testify that you were there. You were actually really living there. Your mom says that you were really there. Too many people have said that you were really there, Melissa, and that you were fooling everybody to think that you weren't there.
I just didn't think he killed my son.
Do you still think that?
No, I don't. That bastard better die in that prison. And I hope it hurts you.
You think he did kill Robert?
Yes, I do. There's all kinds of things to do. Sketch, drawing, all kinds of stuff. All kinds of stuff. It's so much fun. I mean, I've got some pretty good friends in here. Nobody knew me. All they knew was the TV. You know what it was like on the news. You know?
I do.
And the trial and everything. But, I mean, and now they know me. And I play cards and we walk and we, you know, and when we have rec, we can go outside and lay in the sun if we want to. We can walk outside. We can play volleyball, which I do. We actually got homemade baked breads, rolls. The cakes are actually made fresh every day. It's fun. I love it.
After her sentencing, Melissa sobbed as she faced Robert's father and said, "It's my fault that Robert's not with us anymore." But Judge Darla Williamson didn't buy it. She told Melissa directly, "I'm not buying it that you have all that remorse. Parents who love their children would give their lives for their child." Daniel Ehrlich, on the other hand, went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming. Robert's autopsy revealed the devastating truth that confirmed what investigators had long feared. His death was not an accident. These findings were critical in shifting the case from a missing child investigation to a homicide case. They gave prosecutors the evidence they needed to charge both Melissa and Daniel and to finally give Robert a voice in court. When Robert's body was recovered, he was still fully clothed, with rocks stuffed into his pockets, a clear attempt to weigh him down and hide his body. This detail also pointed to intentional concealment, not an accident. From the start, Melissa and Daniel's stories didn't align. Their timelines shifted, and they contradicted each other repeatedly. Detectives noted that their narratives grew weaker with each interview, not stronger. Melissa Jenkins' grand jury testimony was a pivotal moment in the case. It didn't just implicate her, it cemented the case against Daniel. When Melissa took the stand before the grand jury, the pressure was mounting. The evidence was closing in, and the weight of Robert's death was no longer something she could deflect. Under oath, she finally admitted what investigators had long suspected, that on the morning of July 24th, Robert was stumbling, sleepy, and in visible pain. He told her his head, stomach, and back hurt. He could barely walk. She knew he needed medical attention, and she did nothing. She admitted she had seen the injuries, and she admitted she had helped hide him from social workers during their frequent visits. Her testimony confirmed what prosecutors needed to prove, that Daniel's horrific treatment of Robert was not only real but fatal, and that Melissa had witnessed it, concealed it, and enabled it. It gave the grand jury the foundation to indict both of them for first-degree murder, but it also gave the prosecution a first-hand account of Daniel's violence from the one person who had been closest to him. In court, Melissa's words became a linchpin. They weren't just confessions, they were corroborations. They aligned with the autopsy, with the hole in the wall, with the behavioral patterns, with the lies. And they stripped away any remaining doubt about who had inflicted the fatal injuries. The motive behind Robert's murder wasn't just cruelty. It was fear, control, and a twisted sense of self-preservation. Daniel was not Aiden's biological father, but he saw Aiden, Melissa's infant son, as his own. He was obsessed with gaining custody of the baby, especially after Melissa lost custody. At the time of Robert's visit in the summer of 2009, social workers were visiting the home multiple times a week to monitor Aiden's welfare. Daniel knew that if Robert returned to his father, CPS would take Aiden away, and Daniel would lose the one thing he believed gave his life purpose. So in Daniel's eyes, Robert became a threat, a liability, a child who had to be silenced. That fear metastasized into violence. Daniel's punishments escalated, and Melissa, she enabled it. She watched it happen. She helped hide it. She chose Daniel over her son. Robert was bright, kind, and deeply loved by his father. He represented everything Daniel wasn't, and Melissa, already stripped of custody and spiraling in guilt and dysfunction, allowed that resentment to fester unchecked. This wasn't a moment of rage. It was a slow, deliberate erasure of a child who deserved nothing but love. Melissa was not supposed to be living full-time at the Oak Ridge Village apartment with Daniel and her infant son, Aiden. After she lost custody, CPS placed the baby in protective care. However, in a deeply flawed arrangement, Aiden was later returned to the apartment, but under the condition that Daniel would be the primary caregiver and Melissa was only allowed supervised visitation. In reality, Melissa moved back in with Daniel. She was living there full-time, in direct violation of the custody agreement, and somehow, despite CPS visiting the home up to 3 times a week, no one flagged this. No one questioned why Melissa was always present. Let that sink in. A baby who had already survived a traumatic brain injury at the hands of his mother was placed in the care of her violent partner. And not only that, Melissa was living in the home with them, despite her conviction, despite the custody arrangement. Daniel had completed parenting classes, which may have helped him appear compliant on paper, but no amount of coursework could erase his violent tendencies, or the fact that he was now the gatekeeper to 2 vulnerable children. The agencies involved failed to ask the right questions, failed to enforce the terms of Melissa's visitation, and the most infuriating part, no one from CPS was ever held accountable. CPS faced no consequences, no firings, no charges, no public reckoning, just silence. The agencies tasked with protecting children are shielded by bureaucracy, confidentiality laws, and a culture of self-preservation. This isn't rare, it's routine. If a teacher misses a sign, they're investigated. If a parent fails, they're prosecuted. But when CPS fails, they're protected, and children die. This has to change, because Robert wasn't invisible. He was hidden, and the people who were supposed to see him chose not to look. On June 30th, 2011, after 28 days of testimony, over 100 witnesses, and a case that gripped the entire state of Idaho, the jury returned with a verdict. It took them less than 2 hours to find Daniel Ehrlich guilty of first-degree murder. In a courtroom heavy with emotion, Daniel sat with his head down, stoic and silent, as the verdict was read. But in the gallery, the reaction was immediate. A quiet gasp, a whispered yes. Tears welled in the eyes of Robert's family. Tears of grief, yes, but also of relief. After 2 long years, they finally had what they'd been fighting for: justice. Prosecutor Jill Longhurst laid it bare in her closing arguments. This defendant was stuck in that apartment with a little boy who had become the enemy, because Robert was the one person who could take away what this defendant wanted most. That one thing was Aiden, Melissa's infant son, and Robert, in Daniel's eyes, was the threat that had to be silenced. Even Daniel's own father, Daniel Ehrlich Sr., called the news station after the verdict and said he agreed with the outcome. He said, quote, "I will always remember Robert. I never plan to speak to my son again. Judge Darla Williamson, who presided over the case, addressed the jury with deep gratitude, saying, quote, I found this case to be one of the most difficult, complicated, fascinating, and interesting cases I have ever tried as a judge. Outside the courtroom, Robert's father, Charles Manwill, stood before cameras and thanked the community. It's been a long 2 years, but today the system worked. We got some justice for my son. And Robert's aunt spoke for the family's heartbreak. We lost a child, and then we lost Melissa. We lost Aiden. We lost a whole piece of our family because of two people's stupid actions. But we have closure. Robert has justice, and God will take care of the rest. Robert Manwill was 8 years old. He died alone, in pain, hidden in a closet, while the very people meant to protect him looked the other way. And here's the part that should make every one of us furious. No one from CPS was ever held accountable. No one lost their job. No one faced charges. No laws were changed in Robert's name. The system failed him, and then it moved on. There were calls for reform. There were promises of internal reviews, but there was no sweeping legislation, no Robert Manwill Act, no structural overhaul, just silence. And yet Robert's story still echoes. It lives in the hearts of those who searched for him, in the voices of advocates who refused to let his name be forgotten. And now it lives in you. Because if you're watching this, you're not just a viewer, you're a witness. And with that comes a choice. You can turn this off and walk away, or you can stand with us. At Inspector Genxr, we are building a movement, one that demands accountability, transparency, and justice for children like Robert. We are fighting for legislative change, for oversight, for a system that sees every child, and we're not stopping. So if your heart is broken, if your fists are clenched, if your voice is shaking, good. That means you're ready. If you're asking yourself, what can I do? Start here. We've already done the legwork. On our website, you'll find real petitions tied to real legislation, petitions that align with our mission and need numbers to be seen. If you're not sure how to use your voice, this is how. Every signature adds weight. Every click builds momentum. And as our numbers grow, so does our power. Subscribe to this channel, like and share this video, rate and review the Little Voices podcast, because the algorithm is not on our side, but you are. If you believe in what we're doing and want to go a step further, you can support us with a one-time donation through our Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description. Or you can join our YouTube channel membership or Patreon, where you'll get early video access, uncensored content, court documents, and the peace of mind that you're helping keep this mission alive. Because Robert deserved better, and so do the children still waiting to be seen.